Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
Well, who is he?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
And who is he?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
And what he do?
And it's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Oh.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Criminal Lawyer Reacts. This is Bruce Rivers, board-certified criminal defense lawyer, coming to you live with my pearl handle pistol cufflinks so graciously gifted to me by our content genius, Michael Rivers, who's behind the camera as we speak and has my back and I've got his. And can I just tell you, honestly, he is just an amazing talent, and I just love doing this channel with him, and we hang out, and I couldn't be prouder. Anyway, today we're reacting to the Travis Rudolph case. You guys have been asking that for a reaction to that for a while. But he was found not guilty today, and we'll talk a little bit about the concepts involved in this case. But before we get to that, I have to say, it's really sad news. My grandma is in a mental institution now because she's done way too much methamphetamine. And so we had to get the power of attorney and all this other stuff. And so we had to go through lawyers and all that kind of stuff. And I don't really want to go see my grandma because she made my basement smell like cat piss, if you remember. And the reason she's in a mental hospital because I could deal with the meth, I could deal with the cat piss, but when you have a dog that bites a neighbor, that's one thing. But when your grandma bites a neighbor in the neck, I mean, honestly. So I had to get a power of attorney so I could manage her affairs. We did it through eSign.com. Download the app. You get 3 free signatures a month. It's a very effective way to remotely control your grandma when she's in the mental health hospital. Or if you're just trying to do some other kind of business, an effective way to remotely do business. Because if it's not eSign, guess what? No one signs. So that being said, we are now talking about Travis Rudolph. Now, if you remember, Travis Rudolph was a Florida State football player, signed up with the Giants. And for the last 3 years, he's been dealing with this. 4 men appeared on Rudolph's doorstep shortly after midnight on April 7, 2021, to confront him about a dispute he had with his girlfriend earlier in the day. Apparently, he might have treated her a little poorly, and nothing good ever comes from treating a woman poorly. But here's the thing. It's midnight. If you look at the fundamental dynamics, it's midnight. He's at home. He's not bothering anybody at this point, and these guys are coming to his house at midnight. The confrontation turned violent, and Rudolph said he armed himself with a semi-automatic rifle, shot 39 times. And he testified in his own defense. He had followed his brothers outside after the 4 men arrived and was immediately attacked, with one of the men punching him, a brawl between the 2 brothers and the other men. So this is really a defense of his brother and his sister, actually. Once he punches me, all of them started jumping me, he testified. They were saying, "It's demon time. You blank," whatever the expletive is, "you fucked with the wrong girl." I took it that they were going to kill me. So when you use lethal force, you have to have a reasonable belief that somebody is going to either create substantial bodily harm or death. That's kind of the general standard. He testified that he tried to get away from his attackers, and the 2 men cornered him with one warning: "You're going to die today." He said the one man pulled a firearm. Rudolph testified that he then ran to his front door to grab his semi-automatic rifle. So they have a stand your ground law in Florida, and the judge denied him the stand your ground. He's not in his home. There's also the castle doctrine. You know what the castle doctrine is? The castle doctrine is you don't have any duty to retreat in your home. So if the judge denies the stand your ground law, which means you don't have a duty to retreat, it doesn't mean that he denied the self-defense instruction, which he did give. They come to his door. He comes out, and he gets into a fight. They start beating the crap out of him. He runs back to his door to get his gun. His brother's still out there, and he starts firing. So the issue becomes whether or not the actions of Mr. Rudolph were reasonable. Earlier in the process, they had a hearing with the judge, and this is what the judge said about your stand your ground. He wrote that the men were in retreat when Rudolph went back into the house. So if the men are leaving and the fray is over, you don't have the right then to reinitiate. So let's kind of take a look at a little bit of the prosecution's closing, and we've taken a couple of clips, and hopefully they'll be in context, but we'll take a look at a couple of clips from the closing of both the prosecution and the defense.
Start this conversation with you by talking about something that is obvious to all of us, but I want to make sure that we're on the.
This is 9 days of trial, so this is the 9th day. This is when they're doing the closing arguments. And it is something to take that much time out of a busy schedule. You're not getting paid. You get paid like maybe $15, $20 a day. But you're not working. Your life is interrupted. But it's really an important process. Really important to be part of. This is the only time where a citizen's really asked to be part of government.
This case has never been about domestic violence between Mr. Rudolph and his girlfriend. This case has never been about.
That opening, in the opening remarks in her closing statement, is designed to blunt what the defense is going to talk about. Because the defense is, this all stemmed from an earlier incident, and these guys were seeking revenge.
Domestic violence. So we spent a lot of time talking about the anatomy of this relationship and what was going on that day. But this case comes down to something very important. Murder begins where self-defense ends.
Murder begins where self-defense ends. One of the things about a self-defense, and it is counterintuitive, right? Because the defense has to assert self-defense. But once there's some showing, the prosecutor has the burden to prove that it wasn't self-defense. The prosecutor has the burden to show that none of the elements they're basically proven. You got to take them as, it is self-defense. And the prosecutor's job has got to be to knock it out one by one of the elements. Actually, if any one of the elements is not present. But they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was not self-defense. Let me repeat that because it's kind of hard to kind of grasp what this means. It means that Rudolph doesn't have to prove he acted in self-defense. The state, once there's a showing, the state has to prove that he did not act in self-defense.
You will see as I go through my presentation here with you that the state will not allege that Mr. Rudolph did not have a right to be upset that night. You will see as we go through the presentation.
She's almost apologetically pleading her case. It's not about domestic violence. We're not going to say that he didn't have a right to be upset. She's like, instead of Mr. Rudolph went too far, and I think that's probably where I would have gone, but I'm not a prosecutor, so.
There will not be an allegation that it's ever okay for people to just show up to their house in the middle of the night. It's not illegal, but everybody could see how that would make somebody upset.
When you started your case, your opening statement, for example, they're going to be left with the very first thing that you say, basically. So she's prefacing all this stuff instead of getting right into what her argument is. And then she could blunt the other stuff later. And this is just it's a stylistic thing.
I want to start with what started the calls to law enforcement that day.
Those are all gunshots. That's a lot of gunshots.
Murder begins where self-defense ends.
That's a good theme, actually.
After the rounds of shots that we just heard in that shot spotter audio, the following happened to that black Cadillac. There was a gunshot defect into the upper right corner of the rear window. The driver's side window, another impact. The driver's door window, another impact. The driver's door window, another impact. The driver's door window, another impact. Right front headlights, impact.
So you get the point. She goes through each and every bullet that went through the car, and she'll eventually go through, and it went through Mr. Jacques, who passed away. Now let's take a look at the beginning of the defense's closing argument.
Hell has no fury like a woman scorned. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
So, remember when she told you this wasn't about domestic violence? Guess what he says? It's all about that.
Great argument by opposing counsel, but I forgot to talk to you about the facts of the case. About what the witnesses said. About Detective Vanderlyn and her lack of investigation. I didn't know any better. I was watching an episode of The Sopranos.
See, defense lawyers, I'm just going to tell you this. We're a fun group to hang out with, to be honest with you. When we show up at parties, we tell stories, and that's what we do for a living. And we have to be a little more creative than just slopping evidence in, because we have to have a theme. We have to have a defense, right? And what are you hearing? You're hearing color from this seasoned defense lawyer.
Just the names changed. Somebody disrespected a mobster's daughter, and they went to go whack him. They go kill him. That's what this case really is. Not just the video that shows you what it shows you. Of course it doesn't lie, but it doesn't show you the whole story. At the moment of truth, you can't see who's in that car and what they're doing or not doing. You'll never know. It's impossible. State can argue all they want. They weren't there. Shameful that you didn't get to see the real evidence in this case. It's a shame that nobody cared. Thank God he had lawyers.
That's a common tactic to blame a lack of investigation. Because the defense doesn't have that opportunity to go to the scene and collect evidence, right? I mean, not until months later, and then even then it's probably too late. So so a lot of times you'll talk to or question an investigator about this, or this, and you didn't do this, right? And you didn't do this. And this would be important because X. And so that's what he's getting
Lawyers
at.
that cared. Thank God he had lawyers that cared. That asked questions. Wanted to know the truth. 10-minute interview by Detective Vanderlyn.
And the 10-minute interview. So what happens a lot of times, cops will just get the bare minimum. They get what I need to prove my case and see you later. And there might be a lot more behind X, Y, or Z.
10 minutes for two people who are key witnesses and never go back to talk to them again. That defies logic. See, the two reasons for that: total incompetence,
Or they have an agenda.
or she knew if she asked more questions, she'd have a problem. These guys were lying. Her incompetence would show. Either way it shows. Either way. It's ridiculous. This is not Sherlock Holmes. This is Barney Fife. I'm sorry if I'm using old terms
Barney Fife, who the hell is that?
from shows, maybe RFD, but this is crazy. Palm Beach County, one of the most wealthiest counties in America. A 10-minute interview will ask him what happened. And that's fair? That's fair to Mr. Rudolph? Arresting him at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning? With two 10-minute interviews and shell casings and not give a damn about what really happened? Is that fair? How did he get away with that? How? How do you not search the photo? You saw the photos. I'm going to show them to you again. You saw this. You've all been paying attention. We appreciate your sacrifice. We know it's brutal sitting there day after day listening to this. You saw the photographs. You heard the testimony. There's a food truck behind the gas station or the car shop, they don't even know if it's working or open or not. No one even bothered going back to check. Why didn't anyone check? Tons of officers from West Palm. They're at her disposal. She's the producer of this case.
And that is true. The prosecutor has everything at her disposal. She's got investigators, forensics, witness people, and cops. She's got all kinds of things that the defense just simply doesn't have.
If this was a movie, you'd probably walk out in the middle of it or change the channel, but you can't because it's real life. This is what she's giving you. There's not one mention from the state about Vandalin. Of course not. She's an embarrassment to the shield. She shouldn't even be a cop. It's ridiculous, this investigation, and gives you questions that you're going to have for the rest of this case. You'll never know.
Going after the cops hard like that is a very tricky and dicey thing. And the reason is because if you go after the cops and the jury is not behind you, they'll hold it against you.
No one will know what really happened. It's impossible to tell. Why can't you look behind a fence? It takes 3 seconds. Why? Why can't you get a ladder and look on a roof? I had no evidence there. I don't look for anything unless I know it's there. It's the most absurd statement I ever heard. Been doing this a long time. A first-year cop right out of the academy would know you look for things. Why are they showing you all these photographs? Tyler Robinson's injuries. We told you he did it. There's no question he did it. They're not asking for sympathy?
So that is a good point, because autopsy photos and injury photos, at some point they become gratuitous, right? Because you're dealing with somebody's deceased. You're not the person who shot them, and especially in this case, isn't arguing that they didn't do it. It's a matter of what does it mean. So let's cut to the verdict. Now, what happens is the jury will get the case, and then the court clerk will say, okay, we need your cell phone number and be within 10 to 15 minutes of the courthouse. So you have to kind of wait around, and you're waiting and you're waiting and waiting, and then all of a sudden at some point, in this case it was under 4 hours, it was a very short period of time, you get the call. And then you have to go into the courtroom, and when you go into the courtroom, your heart is pounding, your hands are sweaty, and especially, that's like that in every case, but especially on a murder case. And I'm the lawyer. I'm going home, and I'm still that nervous, right? Imagine how 1 minute you're looking at life, the next minute you're on your way home, hopefully. So let's just kind of watch the judge and the courtroom scene as the verdict is reached.
Case number 21 CF 002938 A and B, Division W, State of Florida versus Travis Rudolph. Defendant. Verdict. We, the jury, find as follows. As to count 1, we find the defendant not guilty. As to count 2, we find the defendant not guilty. As to count 3, we find the defendant not guilty. As to count 4, we find the defendant not guilty. So say we all, this 7th day of June, 2023, in West Palm Beach, County, Florida.
So he was charged with murder 1 and 3 other counts of attempted murder. Okay? So he was facing life without parole. This is the kind of case where it's either guilty on everything or not guilty on everything. So they bought the self-defense argument. You can talk to the jurors if they are willing to talk to you. And I always find it's really helpful to talk to a jury after a case to find out what worked, what didn't, what did they pay attention to. And sometimes they pay attention to facts that you didn't think were important. And generally speaking, what they do, they take the defendant back into custody and process them out. I've had a case where the judge says you're free to go right from the courtroom. And that's the way it should be, because once you get the acquittal, there's absolutely nothing left for the judge to hold you. It's a hell of a thing to go through this for everybody involved. But I'll speak to the defendant because I don't represent victims typically. I have, but I typically don't. And this was just a case of what do you believe? Do you believe the defendant was acting in self-defense or not? That's a simple question. And they clearly did. You could get a different result, though, if you tried this in a liberal jurisdiction as opposed to a conservative jurisdiction, as opposed to, like Vermont versus Montana. This is in, pretty red state, Florida, pretty Second Amendment proponents. So to that end, I think the state had an uphill battle. And it's quite a thing when you have a jury. There's two alternates, generally speaking, one or two. And in this case, they had two. And those jurors are important because if somebody gets sick or if there's juror misconduct and they all of a sudden wind up with less than 12 jurors, then they have to start all over. But they don't get to deliberate. So you start out with 14 people in the jury box. Typically, it's the last two that were selected. And when it's time for them to deliberate, they're dismissed. And so think about sitting through a 2-week trial and all of a sudden you don't get to deliberate. It's kind of a letdown. But congratulations to Travis Rudolph. My heart goes out to the people who died, but guess what? Nothing good happens after midnight. So if you fuck around, you're going to find out. And if they would have just stayed home and sent him a letter lodging their complaints, they'd be alive today. Mr. Jacques would be alive today. But it could have gone the other way. I mean, if they would have thought that his actions were unreasonable, because you heard those shots. I think there was 30-some shots. That's a lot. That's a lot of gunshots. And if they thought that was unreasonable, it could have gone the other way. So, congratulations to Travis Rudolph and his team. This is a lesson in self-defense and what the state has to prove, or disprove in this case. So I'm Bruce Rivers. Thanks for watching. Criminal defense lawyer, board certified, I might add. So make sure you sign up for Patreon, subscribe, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, and we'll see you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts.
Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. 23-hour lockdown, please, is that my God?